Thank you very much, Lucy. And hello, everybody. And thank you very much for joining this webinar today. It's pretty interesting because I just saw in the chat box where you guys are joining this webinar from. And I'm not sure whether I have to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. And thank you again for joining this webinar in which we're going to talk about project-based language learning. Obviously, it's been a very recent buzzword in the world of ELT, and a lot of teachers, interestingly, from different countries, from different schools, are actually exploring the advantages that project-based learning has to offer. And today we're going to look at a new aspect of project-based learning, which is integrating it with the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's going to be a quite action-packed session today. We're going to be including a lot of interesting ideas in the session. And of course, just like Lucy mentioned, the chat box is open for all your questions. So if you've got anything, please don't hesitate to ask. All right, without further ado, let's look at the agenda for the day. It's not going to be a very long session. Hopefully, we'll be able to wrap this up in about 55 minutes or so. We'll be looking together at what a good project is, and of course, how we can make a project lesson a better lesson. So obviously, I'll give you some tips and ideas on how to make your project lessons more effective, more enjoyable for your students. We'll look at different ways that we can spice up our PBL lessons. That's for project-based lessons with the United Nations SDGs. And finally, we'll look at a few do's and don'ts, tricky areas or the good areas in PBL that as teachers of language, we need to incorporate in our teaching. So that's a quite short agenda, as you can see. So we'll have a few minutes on each one of these lines. And of course, if you have any questions, just like I said, feel free to put them in the chat box. All right, to begin with, I would like to show you a very interesting photo from 1340 of University of Bologna. And I just want you to think for a moment about what is actually very similar in this picture to our current teaching context. So think about our university contexts, our high school, secondary school, and primary school contexts, and look at the many similarities that you can actually see over here. And I think while you're looking at this picture, you'll find a lot of interesting things as well, including the guys in the back, for instance, who are literally not listening to the teacher and just chit-chatting there. I see a guy over here in blue who is literally sleeping, paying no attention at all to the teacher. Got a few guys here who are basically not into the lesson, obviously. So when you look at the picture really from 1340, that's a few hundred years ago, you can actually see that many of these things are actually happening in our classes nowadays as well. And I think we all know why this is happening. As teachers of language, we've probably have had a very similar experience in the past as well. And well, the basic concept of the session today is really to look at how we can avoid images like this from happening in our classes. And looking at this picture actually made me wonder how we can summarize it, how we can put that in a short sentence. And I found this very beautiful Paul Halmas quote in which he says, the best way to learn is to do, and the worst way to teach is to talk. And well, I'm the kind of teacher, just like maybe most of you, who really doesn't enjoy giving long lectures and talks to his students. Well, unlike this particular session in which I have to talk for a long time, but in a normal condition, in a normal classroom, I would be the one who's probably more quiet than anyone else. And I think that's the basic principle in language teaching, well, in my opinion. And so as you can see from the quote by Paul Halmas, the best way to learn is really to do things. So when your students are engaged in hands-on activities, when they're doing things with their brains, with their hands, with their bodies, I think the real learning happens then. And as I said, we're really going to explore those many ways in which we can engage our students in practical learning. Again, I'm not going to take you through history for a long time, I promise. This is the last thing I'm going to mention about where the idea of PBL actually came from, and then we'll look at more modern stuff. But I think we all need to know who the founding father of project-based language teaching was. Well, one of the founding fathers, really, John Dewey, who happens to be a great thinker and philosopher in education and philosophy and psychology, had this beautiful quote where he said, give your students something to do, and not something to learn. So compare it to a practical hands-on activity to a text on a course book that they have to read and memorize, for instance. And the doing is of such a nature as to demand thinking. And when thinking happens, learner follows naturally. And I think this is a very beautiful quote by John Dewey, where he really emphasizes the importance of action-based, practical, project-based learning. And John Dewey was not alone. Now, not to bore you, obviously, there are literally hundreds of articles and studies and published material that all support the impact, the very high impact of project-based language learning on our students' success in different areas of proficiency, like in their structure, in their vocabulary, in their speaking, in their listening. So a lot of people have actually studied this impact, and they've all seen very similar results. So this session is basically based on the foundation of all that research that has been going on for several years now, starting with, well, John Dewey, obviously. Now, when we look at project-based language learning, or let's give it a general name, project-based learning, there are certain contexts that sound very familiar to us. There are contexts that we feel comfortable where we can apply PBL. So some of the contexts you can actually see on the screen right now. For example, in a kindergarten classroom where kids are making something with their hands, or in a geography lesson, for instance, in a chemistry lesson, for example. So in many of the subject areas, actually doing PBL sounds like an easy idea. It sounds like, yeah, I can do it. Because for a chemistry lesson, you really need to take the kids to a lab and then have them try things, well, save things, and then you'll see how actually something is made or how something is produced. But when it comes to language learning, I think this is where we get a little bit confused, because PBL sounds like a kind of methodology that works in a more more scientific lesson rather than a language lesson. But well, this session is here today to change your mind about that. The session is to give you a few thoughts about how that can actually happen. I'll show you some examples, and I'll give you a few tips to enlighten how this actually is a possibility. But before we do so, I think there's something important that we need to look at, and that's the kids that we're teaching at school now. I assume that most of you are K-12 teachers, teaching either primary, secondary, or high school, or maybe your university prep teachers. So regardless of what kind of student audience you have, I think most of these kids would share some commonalities. And these common things are really all over the world. We've read research from different countries on the East and on the West, in the center as well. And we've realized that, yes, all these modern kids basically want the same thing. And in our methodology of teaching, I think we need to make sure there are 5 principles that are met all the time. And the first one would be our teaching needs to be relevant to our students. And I think most of you would understand what I mean by relevant. This is where we try to create a lesson that kind of connects with our students. So they want to do something that they can find connections with. And this is very important in deciding what topic for your project you want to choose. And please, all these items that I'm presenting right now, try to mentally connect them to project-based language learning, because that's the essence of the session today. I think the second important feature here is that we need to make sure that our teaching is local. And by that, I mean, whatever they're doing through their project needs to connect to their vicinity, to their neighborhood, to their country, to their city, to their region. And then they actually start connecting better with that project. So if they're doing something from a very far land, for instance, or from a very far planet, for instance, they wouldn't feel very local. And that means we would have less participation, we would have less eagerness on the side of our students. Another thing would be making sure that our teaching is actually fresh when it comes to projects. Because if we're doing a project that used to be a buzzword 25 years ago, then kids wouldn't probably want to do it. If we're doing research on an actor or an actress or an artist who was very popular in our times, in my time, for example, after World War II, no one would be interested in that because kids have their own pop stars now. So that's what I mean by fresh teaching and fresh learning. And obviously, I think we all as teachers would agree that real life teaching, real life learning is very important. So a lot of kids now, I've noticed, I've had kindergarten students very recently who've asked me, why are you teaching this to me? Why are we doing this? And if I have no answer to provide in terms of how real life that learning is, they wouldn't want to do it. And I think that's amazing because they keep asking the same question. How does this help me in real world? And if I don't have an answer as a teacher, that means it's probably a failed lesson. And last but not the least, I think our teaching needs to be significant. It really needs to give the students the sense of, hey, what I'm doing right now matters. What I'm doing right now is important. And if they cannot really get to that point, I think that project lesson is, again, prone to failure. So that's a very important point to consider. Well, this is when I think Sustainable Development Goals introduced by United Nations is a kind of ready-made package that kind of deals with all these 5 areas at the same time. And it's a beautiful thing because when you're using the SDGs in your teaching, and I'll talk about them in details in a few minutes, when you're doing SDGs in your classes, you're actually keeping your lessons relevant, you're keeping them local, you're keeping them fresh, you're keeping them real life and significant. And this is very nice because no other package actually gives all of them at the same time. And I think this is a blessing to have United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a kind of a pack where we can really include in our lessons. Now, for those of you, I think most of us are really familiar with the SDGs. It's already in most course books out there that we're teaching. But for those of you that are coming from contexts where SDGs are not popular yet or are not popular at all, these are the 17 principles that United Nations introduced back in 2016 or 15, I think, to help the world become a better place in a very short definition. So these are the kind of messages that we need to deliver. These are the kind of principles that we have to follow. And if we do, we'll make sure that the world we live in actually gives us what we want. And it gives us peace and it gives us resources and so on and so forth. There are certain, obviously, points here that are very easy to be implemented in project-based lessons. And I'll show you some of those as well. I think that's where the fun really begins. All right, here's an example I've got from a grade 1 course book published by Helbling. And when I was looking at this project myself, I was like, okay, is this really the kind of project that is relevant? Is it locals? Because these are the 5 questions I always ask myself when I'm giving a project-based lesson to my students. And well, it may be very simple, this project, but the fact is, it's for first graders, and it's the first few weeks they're attending school. So we can't really give them something heavy and expect them to be able to use beautiful language to produce this project, but rather we can give them a very simple task and yet expect them to achieve some of the objectives on the SDG list. And here, this project, as simple as it is, asks your students to create their super bedroom. Now, well, as we go higher in the levels, we'll see that the steps we have to take get more complicated. But I think for the first grade students, something as simple as this would actually be enough. So students are supposed to make their super bedroom. It could be their super house. It could be their super city, their super country, whatever. Just get the idea. And then they're supposed to put a few items, random items like a desk, like a ball, like a robot, like a bed, into wherever they want in their bedrooms. And obviously, this is a lot of hands-on activity, as you can see, because you have to cut things, you have to glue things, you have to color things. Well, for a first grader, this would be a great project. Actually, maybe a lesson or two, you'll have to go with this. But what I really care about as a teacher, and as John Dewey mentioned earlier, it's the thinking that we put into this. Now, I would definitely ask my students, without really expecting a good answer, why they think this is a super bedroom and how is it different compared to their normal bedrooms. And the amount of thinking, regardless of what language they think in at this level, would really be the thing that I want to get from this lesson. And obviously that would connect with some of the SDGs at the same time, because this is well-being. When your room is super room, you kind of feel like, wow, I'm happy in my room, so I want to stay here and study, for instance. So that definitely connects with well-being, and of course, it's quality education because you learn to keep your room clean. You learn to decorate your room in a good way, and that's good education as well. So this is one example, and I just thought maybe I would give you this as a foundation, and then you can really start from here and move ahead and create your own projects that would fit this kind of framework. At this point, as I said, I'll give you more examples, but before we move on, I just want to share a few really good qualities of a good project lesson as well. And these are the things that, again, are based on research and based on personal experience. And I think we really have to consider them whenever we're doing a project lesson, because otherwise, then things move slowly towards giving us lessons which are not very effective. And I'll mention why I mean that. So the first really important quality of a good project lesson is that we should not, as teachers, consider it a presentation lesson. So the idea of a project lesson is not to tell your students, hey, go and do this research, then create this PowerPoint file, and then present it to your classmates. I think we shouldn't really looking at the final product as the ultimate goal of a project lesson. The real goal is actually the process, the whole trying, the whole discussion, the whole critical thinking is what we really have to care about in a project lesson, I guess. And that would be one of the qualities of a good project lesson. The second quality, and I think this is maybe by far one of the most important ones, is that the project lesson really needs to allow your students to make a few choices. Now, these choices could be in any area, like, for example, who they want to work with, which part of the project they want to complete, how long they need for this project, where they want to present it, or how they want to present it. So there are so many variations, so many possibilities here that we can allow students to make choices for it. And this is really important because, it's a skill. Decision making is a very important skill that children need to possess. And we really don't have to wait until they graduate to give them this ability, to give them this power, because the school is also a part of their lives and they really need to practice this all the time. I'm not saying that all the choices your students will make will always be perfect. They'll probably come up with very bad decisions sometimes, but still there's learning in that. This is beautiful because when they learn from their own mistakes, they really learn. And I really appreciate that kind of learning. This, by the way, when you give your students a chance to make choices, is also following the rules of what we know as SEL, or social and emotional learning, where you are trying to develop human beings who are kind, who are empathetic, who are responsible. And I think that's killing too many birds with just one single stone. All right, moving on. The third one of these qualities would be what Lev Vygotsky, the Russian psychologist, would refer to as the ZPD, or zone of proximal development, or even very similar to what Stephen Kreshen's I+1 theory suggests. That's where we are very careful about the level of the project that we're giving to our students. So if we ask our first graders to create a project about pollution, for instance, and then offer some solutions for that, this would be just too much. Or if we asked our high school students to create their super bedroom, again, this would be too easy for them. And I think the right level of challenges is something very important. And of course, we sometimes learn it on the go. We sometimes pick a project idea for our class and then we realize it was too easy or too challenging. But again, I think as teachers, we need to be reflective and seeing what works for which age group, for which proficiency level group. And that's how we can literally adjust the level of projects that we're giving to our students. Another important thing about the quality of a good project would be the fact that we need to make sure that every single step our students take towards completing that project needs to be assessed by us. And by assessment, I'm not talking about really taking your red pen and scoring or grading their work, but really watching closely what they're doing and maybe give them a little bit of a push whenever they need some, or maybe redirect them if you have to. And that means continuous assessment, which is very important because imagine your kids, your students going a long way completing a project and then finally realizing that the product is not really what you wanted them to make. So this whole trying would actually be wasted. And we don't want that to happen because that's psychologically speaking also very discouraging for our students. So I think we really need to make sure that we are holding hands with our students while they're doing their projects. Again, this would be very clear. I think we all would agree on this. But as English teachers, as language teachers in general, we shouldn't be really looking at a project lesson as a burden. Now, in some of the contexts I've taught English in, I've realized that project lessons, because they usually appear in some course books nowadays, are kind of, kind of like, hey, let's just do a project in an hour so I can just sit back and relax kind of attitude some teachers have had. Even I have had some of that attitude at some points of my teaching, I have to confess. But I think we really need to avoid this because when we do it, students will start doing the same thing. They would view a project lesson as just a way of passing the time. And I think that's not really cool. We need to really highlight the importance of project-based lessons because now I kind of forgot to mention that right in the beginning, but of all the research done in the field of education on the top teaching and learning methodologies, teaching by project or PBL actually stands on top. So it's one of the very best ways of teaching anything, including languages. And I think it would be really pity to kind of spend that 1 hour doing nothing special in the classroom. And finally, I think as teachers, we really need to think outside the box here when we're asking our students to work on a project. The project is not just a process to get to a final product. It's also developing a lot of skills at the same time. It's doing a lot of listening, doing a lot of reading, writing, pronunciation, different other language skills and sub-skills on one hand. And on the other hand, it's acquiring a lot of other important skills like creativity, for instance, like collaboration, my favorite term in teaching, I think. That's maybe a very nice word there. Planning, digital skills, life skills, and so many other important things. So a single project actually creates the foundation for all of this. And I think using that would be a great opportunity for our students to really acquire all of these at the same time. Now, I'm not saying every single project lesson will be a perfect ground for all of these skills to be learned, but even a few bits of each in every single lesson will add up at the end of the year to a huge accomplishment on your side as a teacher and on your students' sides as well. All right, okay, let me show you another example. Here's where we actually have all of these, qualities that I mentioned come together in a really nice way. And I think this is probably one of the really nice projects I've seen. I haven't tried it with my own students yet, but I'm really looking forward to it because I think this would be an amazing project lesson, especially because you remember how I said a good project lesson needs to be fresh, it needs to be local, it needs to be relevant. This project I'm showing you has actually all of that at the same time, and it also provides the ground for multiple skills learning as well. So as you can see, students here are to kind of create a poster, and on that poster, they have to give instructions about cybersecurity, which is a very important matter. I was just reading a very interesting study where the researchers had found that the new generation, the kids we're teaching at school, are actually more aware of their privacy online than our generation. So if you ask me, for instance, I've got one email address, well, one personal email address, and I have used that to register on every single website I visit for different purposes. And so, it's not a very safe thing, apparently, according to cyber people. So, but the kids nowadays are actually aware of this. They're not revealing their personal information too much, but still they need some education there. And this kind of project actually enables them to do that. So if you think about this project, it's relevant, it's local, it's fresh. It's not just a presentation tool because you have to really go online, talk to people, and watch videos to collect information. And then all of that would result in a poster or a presentation where you help your classmates actually increase their knowledge of being safe online. And this, I think, correlates with the SDG number 16, where justice is actually being looked at. So you see how beautifully these projects actually connect with something very useful that eventually helps our students have better worlds and better lives as well. Okay, moving on. Oops. If you remember, I mentioned that one of the qualities of a good project would be collaboration. And collaboration is really very important because it is, of course, it's a way of helping our students to communicate to one another. It's a way of helping our students to use the grammar, to use the pronunciation and vocabulary that they have. So it obviously has language advantages to our students. But on the other hand, I think collaboration actually gives more than that to our students. It helps our students to really grow in multiple ways that I'll mention in a few minutes. Well, how many types of collaboration can we really have in the classroom? And I think we all would agree with teacher collaboration with students and peers collaborating together. But I'm here to also add another one, the MKOs as collaborators. And MKOs, according to a Vygotskian theory, are the more knowledgeable others. And these can be anyone, from parents to siblings to relatives and artificial intelligence as well. So I'm going to show you how we can actually use collaboration, or why we should be using collaboration in order to enhance our project lessons. So let's first look at teacher and student collaboration. This is important because as a teacher, we probably have two primary roles in the classroom. The first one really is to listen to our students. When we listen to our students, we kind of encourage them to participate more. We kind of encourage them to share more, and that's a good thing. But what is really listening well to our students? I've had this discussion with plenty of teachers, and I always get very interesting ideas. And I'm here to share some of those ideas from the teachers, actually. I think the first sign that we are listening well to our students, and maybe the most important sign, is that we're not echoing our students. Now, echoing is super important. Well, obviously, not echoing is super important because when you echo someone, when you echo your students, it kind of gives them the message that, hey, I don't care about what you're saying. I care about how you're saying it. And so I care about your grammar and pronunciation and so on and so forth. But, well, obviously, when you stop echoing, then kids begin to realize that you're paying attention. And to give you a very nice justification of why we should be avoiding echoing is, just think about yourselves in real world. Do you ever echo your friends, your family, your spouse? Probably never do it, right? Because they would be like, why are you doing this? Why are you repeating everything I'm saying? And I think avoiding echoing is probably the first step that we need to take in order to tell our students that I am listening to you. Now, of course, if you have your reasons to echo, like for correcting their grammar, for example, that's a different story. But I'm talking about a general teaching habit over here. I think the second important sign of a teacher really and sincerely listening to their students is avoiding insincere praise. This is when teachers react quite strangely to students' productions of language. So, for example, you ask a student where they are from, and they tell you they are from a particular city, and then you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Well, I don't think that's amazing, you know? So if somebody's from a city, that's it. You don't have to really and I'm not suggesting that you're doing this. I'm talking about this in general sense, of course. I think we really need to um, we really need to make sure that the golden words we use as a praise, like "wow, amazing, great," need to match the production of the student. So if they really say something amazing, we have to say amazing. If they're saying something just normal, you just nod or show a thumbs up or something similar. Because just imagine if you use up all those words, fantastic, fantabulous, and if they're doing something really fabulous, then there's no word to describe their or to praise their action. So that's what I'm trying to say. Let's match the reaction with the action. Too much criticism, on the other hand, can also be very dangerous. Like there are some students that are very sensitive, and I think as teachers, you have already spotted those students in your classes. I'm not saying be unfair to your students, but what I'm trying to say is sometimes some criticism can be kept, maybe for personal feedback later, or maybe can be a written feedback, or sometimes we feel that as teachers, this student will make it one day. So let's give them the chance. Maybe not criticize them right now, because sometimes it's a very tricky matter. And as teachers of Generation Z, all of us, I think we have to be now ready for multiple responses. Because in our times, when a teacher asked a question, there was usually one answer that they got back. It was the answer. But now, with the modern kids thinking very creatively, and I really like this about these kids, they can actually come up with very interesting answers, answers that we have never thought of. And I think we have to be ready for that scenario as well. And of course, the golden rule about listening to our students in any lesson, including PBL lessons, is the thinking time. Now, according to research, and this is a proven fact, and I'm sure you have lived this experience in your own classes as well, the more thinking time you give to your students, the better answers, the more sophisticated answers you get. Because usually the first few hands that go up have the shortest answers or they have the most direct answers. But when your students are actually able to think, they come up with better answers. Another dreadful study, a result I was reading a few days ago, actually mentioned that globally speaking, of the teachers of all subjects around the world, the wait time for the teachers, the thinking time that they give to their students is actually at a very horrible rate. It's just 0.9 seconds, even less than a second. And I think no matter how pressed our schedule is, our students need probably a few seconds, not a few milliseconds, to come up with answers. You know what I'm talking about. Moving on, so as I mentioned, the first rule is to listen well, and the second rule would be to ask well. Because a good question, according to Joseph O'Connor, is a question that makes your students think. And a thought-provoking question is always a successful question because it makes people go like, hmm. And that's the moment where you know good ideas are coming, good ideas are on their way. So to make that happen, I think we need to, as teachers, make sure that our questions are all planned. So we already know what we're going to ask the students. Well, we can sometimes ask spontaneous questions, but I think most of the time, those need to be prepared in advance. Some questions may not work. Some tasks that you give to your students may not work from the very beginning. And I think as teachers, it's always good to have anticipated those and have a kind of plan B over there. Just like I mentioned earlier, we need to be really assessing our students on the go. And based on their reactions and based on their performance, we need to reroute sometimes if it's necessary. And of course, again, another golden term in language teaching, I think, is reflection. As teachers, at the end of every lesson, I think we need to give ourselves just a few minutes, maybe about 1 or 2 minutes, to quickly go back and think about everything that happened in the classroom. Maybe take a few notes or just record your voice, saying your thoughts and feelings about that particular lesson, because that reflection, according to research and studies, has actually got the biggest impact on your development as a teacher. So that's something to take very seriously. Okay, I'm going to go through this now with the peer collaboration. As I said, I'm a big fan of peer collaboration. My students are always working together, well, maybe 90% of the time in the classroom. And I find this very rewarding because it makes my job very easy. And, in many ways, it makes classroom management very easy. And of course, it has several other advantages. And the first one would be the fact that it gives my students the opportunity to think more logically. Because when I'm thinking alone, I may have hundreds of ideas. I may have literally related and unrelated ideas that come to my head before I want to answer a question. But when I'm talking to somebody about my ideas, I try to kind of filter them out. I try to, decorate them or make them more logical. And that's how I make sure that logical thinking actually happens in the classroom. When your students are working together, they're obviously spending more time on the task or on the project that you're giving them. So if an individual can take care of an activity in 30 seconds, two individuals, again, according to personal experience I've seen, can actually spend about 3 minutes on the task to finish that. Is it a good thing? Definitely, if that 3 minutes is filled with language, so they're talking, they're discussing, they're arguing, they're debating. And I think that's what we want in a language classroom. It also gives your students a sense of belonging, the peer collaboration, because for a lot of our students, well, you might not be aware of this, but their only friends are the people sitting right next to them in the classroom. Right after school, they may have no other friends, no other person to communicate with even. And I think the fact that through a project they can actually work together makes them feel important, makes them feel connected. And that's a good feeling. I think we all would agree with that. The fourth one is the term that I've been trying to use instead of the word classroom management in the past few years, a classroom coexistence, where everybody learns to become empathetic, where everybody learns to enjoy each other's company, and where everybody actually learns to live together in the classroom context. I think it's a very beautiful word, classroom coexistence, much better than classroom management, because when you say classroom management, you're talking about a manager and employees, power, monotony and stuff like that. So I think we really need to do away with these words, but coexistence is a nice word where really fits our context as well, because in the classroom, we're spending about 6, 7, 8 hours of our life every day, and we really need to learn to live together. And of course, peer collaboration allows us to do differentiation as well. And by that, I mean, we can actually decide who works with who sometimes. A weaker student with a stronger student, so they can actually learn from each other. Two students very knowledgeable in a subject area working together to even strengthen their current knowledge. So you can actually think about hundreds of ways to differentiate your classes. And I think that's a big gift that PBL actually offers to us. And finally, I'd like to talk about the MKO, or as I said, Vygotsky theory, where MKO refers to more knowledgeable other. Now, this can be anyone, as I said. It can be a teacher, it can be a peer, it can be a parent, a sibling, or the artificial intelligence. Because I'm not saying artificial intelligence is more intelligent than us. Well, I don't know the answer to that question, whether it is or not. Not open to negotiation at this point in this session. What I'm trying to say is it can actually be used as a tool. But how do we use that? Now, when I was preparing this session, I thought, why not just ask ChatGPT, for instance, to give us a random project idea for seventh grade students on one of the random SDGs? And well, I wasn't sure if I was going to get the right or a desired answer or not, but ChatGPT actually did a good job. It gave me a very good project idea. And well, I haven't tried it. I'm not sure if it's a really good project idea or not, but it looked okay to me, to be honest. But then I thought maybe we shouldn't really doing this. Maybe we should be thinking about either this or helping our students use artificial intelligence to do their project. And obviously, if that is the case, then we should really prevent them from doing this. Because one concern I have with artificial intelligence personally, I love artificial intelligence. I think it's a huge, huge piece of technology that is going to make our lives very easy in the future. But I think this way of asking ChatGPT to do things for you is not a really good one, because with that sentence, I did zero thinking. And that's what I'm against. I think we have to keep thinking in our learning context. And that's why I think we have to really help our students with the non-digital skills, the skills that would help them use artificial intelligence more effectively. Number one, communication skills. So uh, how do you communicate with ChatGPT, for example? How do you create the correct prompt? How do you word your prompt? How do you structure your prompts? Stuff like this. I think these are very important. Listening skills are very important because ChatGPT actually talks to you, either in words or through voice. You can actually listen to it. So what is listening? And what should you get from the ideas that are given to you? Well, how do you critically analyze what you're listening to? I think these are very important skills. Problem solving, very similar. Inquiry skills, again, writing prompts. And of course, patience. You really have to be very patient when you're using this technology now, because it probably takes some time to get to the final desired outcome. It doesn't always give you the best answer in the beginning. So you need to inquire more. You need to listen well. You need to try to solve some of the problems in the answers. And through that, you actually get to the final product. And I think, well, this is not on my slide, but I think there's an important lesson that we should teach to our students, and that's how to keep a dialogue going. And this is really important because dialogue is basically what happens with artificial intelligence, at least with ChatGPT. You have a conversation with it. So it's a kind of skill, it's a kind of art to have in order to continue a structured and successful conversation with the artificial intelligence. So that's one thing that I should have probably added to my list, but let's keep that in mind. Here's another project idea from another Helbling book, Jetstream. Again, I love this particular project, and I think it has all those features that I've been talking about so far. It's definitely relevant because it talks about extreme weather conditions, something that I think every single human being is somehow affected by in the past few years. Probably noticed how short this winter was, at least in my region. We didn't get much snow, and I think that's scary, and that's something that we need to really quickly take some action for. Is it fresh? Yes, it is, because we're talking about something that is already happening in the world. Is it real life? Definitely. It's so real life. Is it important? Yes, because otherwise, the world as we know it might be very different in the next few years, and it might not be good different. It might be bad different. So I think a project idea like this, where students are doing research on extreme weather disasters, and then they write a kind of report for a country that they choose, is where students actually connect the SDG, climate action, to their project and do something useful. And I am guessing, based on, again, personal experience as a student and as a teacher, doing a project like this will now make me more aware. I will now want to go home and talk to my parents about this. I would now probably turn off the lights when they're on for no reason. See what I'm talking about? These are actually very small steps that would definitely create huge impact on the future of humanity. All right, we're moving kind of towards the end now, but I think before we sign off, we really need to look at something very important, and that's giving feedback to our students. For that reason, I've got a quick um, I've got a quick conversation I want you to look at. I'm not going to talk for at least 30 seconds, so you can kind of rest your ears, and then please take some time to read this quick conversation. Okay, I'm seeing in the chat box a teacher without heart or brain. Okay, yeah, maybe not that extreme, but I think, yeah, we all would agree that this conversation shouldn't have happened. Usually in my training sessions, when I show this conversation to teachers, I get a few smiles, I get a few laughters, but I'm guessing that deep inside we all feel the pain that that student has felt. Now, as someone whose main language, whose mother tongue wasn't English, I also learned English outside, like at school, and I can really easily connect with this kid over here. I can really feel the pain that she has felt, because you don't want to be corrected like that, you know. It's not good. It's not right. And well, I've had teachers who were trying to support this teacher here, who said maybe the teacher wanted to somehow make the kid forget about the sad event or something. But really, no, I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should have hugged that little kid and told them that it was going to be all right. We should have probably called their parents and asked them to maybe take the kid home. Maybe this is not the right day to send them to, something like that. At least whatever right thing is in your context, we should have done that, but not correcting their grammar. That's the message I'm trying to give. But the point is, yeah, this looks very extreme. This looks very direct. But sometimes we do things like this. When I say we, I'm talking about myself as well. We do things like this without even noticing that we're doing things like that. So, for example, it could be a positive comment as well, telling our students, hey, wow, you're smart. I think this has the very same impact as this. I'm going to tell you why, but when we're looking at feedback and correction, there's only one ultimate goal that we're thinking about, and that is to encourage our students to get better and not to get tired of trying. I think that's the ultimate message of feedback, right feedback. So when you tell your students, hey, wow, you're smart, it's like the student would think, okay, I'm good then. I don't need to get better. I'm smart. I'm better than anyone else. You see, that feeling would probably prevent them from wanting to grow better. And that's where the risk of feedback actually lies. So that's one thing. Another one, so the teacher saying this, your project title was really interesting. It made me want to explore it. I think this is good feedback. This is an example of feedback based on growth mindset, where you give your students accurate feedback on what they did and what it was that made you happy about what they've done. So, for example, your project title was really interesting means you have the ability to pick the right title for your presentation or for your project. And this is absolutely good feedback because you're giving a reason and there's logic behind your reason, and kids understand that. They know it's a sincere message. Next time, I promise they'll make even a better project title. How about this one? Let's just think about this. I'm not impressed. You need to do better next time. Making it very personal. Like, we are not the kings or queens that are in the classroom to be impressed. You know what I'm talking about? Students are doing hard work there to create a project, and their job is not to impress us. So messages like this would definitely be miscommunicated. Or this one, do you even care about your grades? Because this project suggests otherwise. I think this is a horrible comment. We're connecting project work with grades, failure, and you know what I'm talking about. So this is the kind of thing that would probably have more risks than advantages. Or terminology like this. Oh, I never think a teacher would say that. I don't know why I said this or why I wrote this here, but I'm pretty sure no teacher would ever tell their students, this is just garbage. I don't know why you even bothered. So even if the project was really garbage, you know, we shouldn't be really using this kind of word because the impact it creates is just going to be forever. And that kid may be unsuccessful in that project, but I guarantee that kid would also be unsuccessful in language learning or maybe in any other subject learning, because that kind of message is very strong. Something positive like this. I liked how you made sure that every single team member was contributing. See, this is a very nice comment to a student in which the teacher's trying to say, wow, you have strong collaboration skills. So I think if we're giving a positive comment, we should stay away from things like great, awesome, well done. We should be very specific with what we're saying, and then the magic of feedback actually happens. And last but not the least, a teacher saying to the students, okay, thank you for these projects. I'll look at them next month. If you're cooking souffle, this is a quote I've forgotten who said, but if you're cooking souffle, you need to eat it right out of the oven. So don't wait for the feedback, because a feedback that is given a month ago to students will probably not work much, and I think we all know why. All right, coming towards the end, there is one more area that I think I'm also aware that we have about 6 minutes to finish, so we'll be on time, hopefully. One area that is very important as well is when we encourage our students to do self or peer reflection. And well, some course books, like a couple of the course books that I just showed you, actually have this feature on them where they actually give your students a checklist that they need to tick off as they're reading to evaluate their own work and to reflect on it. So did I plan my work with my group? Yes, you tick it. Did I find information, pictures, or videos online? Yes. So you kind of have a checklist like this, and this checklist can really adapt to any context you're teaching, to any project that you're teaching. You can even use the artificial intelligence to generate a checklist like this to you, but you can customize it with your own context-specific features. And then obviously, students will have to go through it at the end. There are a few items here that I really like. For example, we thanked everyone for listening. And then they tick off the item and they move on. So I think it's very important to have the students to check their own work and not always have their work checked by us. Because we're human beings too. We don't always have the time to do this. But sometimes we can use tricks like this to make sure that feedback is given, but at the same time, students' efforts are also seen. Okay, this is a page or slide that I've tried with a lot of teachers actually, and you're gonna get a little bit interactive with this, but not too much, I'm afraid. I just want you to count the number of items that you can really very well recognize on the screen. So for example, you know what it really is, and you know what it does, you know its name, you know its function. So maybe in the chat box, just write the number of items that you recognize. So there are like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 items. You can write 1, you can write 2, you can write 3, or you can write nothing. It's really up to you to decide if you want to share your ideas. Oh, wow. Thank you. Okay. Now, I'm not looking at the answers really, just scroll very quickly. But I think as teachers of language, especially, and teachers of Generation Z, we really need to keep that number high because everything that you're seeing on the screen right now are the important things that kids are dealing with in their everyday lives. So, to give you an example, I'm not promoting them, but Minecraft, for example, is an amazing game loved by literally millions of kids, played by millions of games in many different contexts and countries. And I think as teachers, we really need to know what Minecraft is. Just try it. Open a discussion about Minecraft, but especially the boys. I think boys are really into this. I've had girl students who have loved it as well. Snapchat, for example, Gacha Life, a very popular multiplayer game as well. Start talking about these in the class, and you'll see that kids would really enjoy it. And now imagine doing something project based about these. And I'm just going to summarize what I'm saying about this. Uh, Imagine students doing a project on Minecraft about, for example, helping children who don't have access to school, but by building a school for them on Minecraft. Think about all the interaction, all the beautiful conversations that would happen. Think about all the research that would go into this and all the fun that kids will have while creating their Minecraft worlds. I think this is just amazing. And this is another way of really doing the projects with your students. Okay, uh, this is a general lesson flow when we are actually where we are actually mixing PBL, project-based learning, with the SDGs. I think it's quite explaining itself whatever there is. I think these are the steps that we need to take to make sure that a project lesson really goes well. So it starts with introducing and setting the goals, doing some research about the topic, integrating the cross-curricular. This is where SDGs actually come into action, planning your project, working together with the other students or with the MKO or with the teacher, implementing this, creating your project, evaluating or reflecting on it, and finally celebrating this, which is I think is very important, and finally moving on to the next step or the next steps or the next project, whatever it is. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say. Just gonna show you this slide where I want you to think very quickly about the whole session, the whole 1 hour that has passed, and decide if you had any aha moments, moments that you're like, oh, that makes sense, or it could be completely opposite. It could be like, no, I disagree with that. I think it should have been. So, any comments, any ideas, any aha moments that you had about the session, put that in the chat box so we can actually learn from each other's learning as well. Let's spend about 30, 45 seconds on this. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I'm guessing that I should be really thanking you for wanting to know more today than you did yesterday. And if you've got any further questions, if you've got any thoughts about the session, I'm sharing my email address as well, so you can stay in touch. And once again, thank you for taking your time and attending this webinar. It was an absolute pleasure for me to be working with you today. And thank you again. Cheers.